So thanks for joining us another week, and we're indeed extremely excited and always looking forward to sharing with you in this forum where we are able to discuss various articles, documents, white papers as it relates to various um, issues that are actually taking place within cybersecurity and the GRC space. And for sure, we are going to be looking at a particular uh, article that was published, and I definitely, matter of fact, let me just quickly pop the source of this document inside the chat so that you're able to follow along with us as we go along in our discussion. And we are always joined by Chris, one of my good friends. Chris, thanks for joining us once more.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, sure, definitely. We always look forward to having these, wonderful conversations where we can actually gain insights and to add value to all individuals within the cybersecurity space. And the article that we're looking at today is the issue of zero trust, and more so within the context of the title itself, within the article that speaks about zero trust is moving away from hype to reality. And to me, that's a very interesting way to put it, the way the author actually coined that, moving from hype to reality. And it needs to ask the question of, was it really hyped in terms of the concept or the buzzword itself? It was one of those buzzwords talking about least privilege, then zero trust, then defense in depth. These three concept has always been in the forefront of discussions, and many organizations are actually looking at implementing these elements within their security stack in terms of building that level of security or cyber resilience within their organization. But this for sure comes with its own challenges, and yeah, that was one of the things that we really want to look at in terms of what it is that organizations implement, what are the challenges they will face along the way. So, Chris, based on your review of this particular article itself, though, can you shed some light? Just to give us an idea of when we talk about zero trust, for those who might not understand the concept behind zero trust, give us a quick overview of zero trust, and then we can then move further into its application.
Yeah, so zero trust, and thank you again for bringing light to this. This is really an important topic. A lot of people kind of attribute the zero trust idea to a guy by the name of John Kinderbakken. But really, zero trust started probably around in the mid 90s. It was coined by a gentleman, I think by the name of Stephen Paul Marsh. He wrote a paper about it, but it was popularized by John Kinderbakken. And really what it's saying is it's the idea, right? It's pretty much an evolution of the trusted perimeter. Traditionally, what organizations would have is what they call, we've heard this before, the old castle and moat architecture, where you have firewalls, you have kind of a network segments, and then you have the corporate network. And what happens is whenever someone comes in through a firewall via VPN, they would have access, right? They would say once you have authenticated through a firewall and you come through a VPN, you now have access to pretty much everything that's within that firewall. I think as security kind of evolves, what we're moving towards is what we call a perimeter-less secure model, right? A lot of people kind of use the phrase, identity is the new perimeter. What does that mean? It means that you have people with devices, trusted or untrusted, accessing your network to interact with data sitting on applications. A lot of things can go wrong there. Now you've moved from a sort of that everything that's sitting in a data center to applications that are sitting, whether it's in a private cloud or a public cloud, right? You have SaaS applications, and then you have folks with their BYOD, their own devices, accessing data from anywhere. So with that evolution, we really have to change or shift the way we think about how we secure our assets, our data, our applications, and our services. And as we talk more about the principles and concepts of zero trust, we'll kind of get into more of the components, the models, the principles, so on and so forth. But long story medium, I would say, zero trust is a concept of, protecting data, right? Regarding of who's accessing the data, when they're accessing the data, why they're accessing the data, how they access the data, and, again, from where they access the data.
Yes, definitely. In the simplest way put, and for sure we know that it can become far more complex, more complicated in terms of how it is actually planned for. It requires a number of strategic planning, requires a number of certain skill sets, resources, applications. Um, for sure, this is that actually requires the endorsement of the board executives. It's not something that can actually be placed or thrown inside an organization without properly evaluating the purpose, the objective for which it is being implemented. And I guess that is one of the drawbacks over the years that many organizations or individuals seem to have some sort of a reservation as it relates to the implementation of zero trust. And one of the things I recognize in the article is that it says that most organizations view zero trust as a top priority when it comes to reducing risk in their environments. However, zero trust at scale across the entire organization is yet to become a reality for many organizations. So from this, I recognize that organizations do see the importance of implementing zero trust. Yes, there are challenges and there are still reservations. Can you share further lights on this in terms of
Yeah,
what actually?
yeah, I think, and COVID, again, one of the things you could blame COVID for is bringing zero trust to the forefront of the security conversation. Why? Because overnight you had everyone had to go remote. What does that mean? That means that the global attack surface has now shifted and it becomes more dynamic, right? So you have folks the traditional VPN where you again log in. You have a VPN client installed on your desktop. You log in through like a secure tunnel, right, over an untrusted network into your network. A lot of things can go wrong there. If a user gets compromised, their endpoint gets compromised, they now access the network. It becomes a ball of wax, or it becomes kind of a Pandora's box where once an untrusted intruder comes in, he or she can move laterally across your environment, especially for those environment that has a flat network, that have a flat network. So you go in, you escalate your privilege, you maintain access, you continue to move laterally, you escalate access, and you start exfiltrating data, command and control. A lot of things can go wrong. So now what zero trust does is just saying, trust is a vulnerability, right? So every time a resource or an individual tries to access a workload or a service or an application, that means you have to verify the trust of that entity who's accessing the data, right? So that's a huge shift in terms of the old castle and moat, which I talked about earlier, the old castle and moat paradigm, where once you come in, you have access to roam around the kingdom, right? So, and a kind of a poor analogy that I would use to kind of differentiate zero trust from the old paradigm of the castle and moat. Again, think of the castle and moat as you have kind of a water going or a moat going around, right? There's a bridge going across. You have to open the gate. You get in. Once you get in, you have keys to the kingdom. Today, again, a poor analogy, but it kind of holds up to a certain point. Think of a hotel, right? You have a security guard at a hotel. You check into the hotel, and they give you a key card. Each person who has a key card has access to only their room, right? But once you get in your room, you also have a safety box where you have to type in a password to get into the safety box where you store all of your valuables, right? Poor analogy, because you can still move around in the room, but I think you understand the difference in terms of the castle and moat versus the zero trust mentality, where trust becomes a vulnerability, and you can no longer trust anything at any time for any given reason. They have to continuously verify their identity. They have to, telemetry has to go back and forth, right? You have to design a dynamic micro perimeter, and always adopt a context-based security model, right? A lot there, but I think you kind of get the picture.
Yes, I do. Uh, but thinking about zero trust, the question is this something that is really new? Is this a new concept in totality? In light
No, I
of
don't.
the fact that many organizations seem to be struggling or shying away from, although they should be moving towards. Is it something new in totality?
I think it's evolving. I mean, I could sit here and pontificate as much as possible about, or as much as eloquently as I can about zero trust, but it becomes very difficult, right? When you put it into practice. And I think, so to answer your question off the bat, no, it's not a new concept. It's an evolution. It's an evolution. It's evolving over time, right? Now you have sort of, you have a lot of different capabilities. You think about the CNAP framework, right? And within that, you have the SASE piece, you have the identity piece, you have the ability to see how folks are accessing your environment. You see what's happening while they're interacting with your environment, and then you also have, for example, in the case of a CASB, you have a technology that's sitting between the SaaS application and the user, who's consistently verifying what's happening, right? Cloud security posture management. These are all pieces, but I think over time, they continue to evolve. So you could even look at zero trust, where you have signature-based endpoint solutions. Now you have EDR, right? Where before you were focusing on signatures, right? Hash signatures. So what happened? The bad actors understood what that meant, so they started changing the signature, which meant now you have to depend more on machine learning or AI technology to detect, right, and take action on anomalous behavior, right? So I think the concept has always been there. Most people have, for example, they have two-factor authentication, they have network segmentation, they have identity and access management, they have different pieces. The challenge is, how do you bring all of that under one overarching architecture that allows you to move across, allows you to work efficiently without disrupting how knowledge workers carry out their remit?
Yes, exactly. So definitely for sure, the concept has always been there, and many organizations have been actually implementing bits and pieces of zero trust, maybe not recognizing the context of the fact that they have actually been doing this.
Right.
Well, I think what has happened now, as I said before, it has evolved. It has now become a more structured, um, technique or technology, if you want to put it in that way, taking into consideration that in order to implement zero trust, then it's a combination of various approaches, various techniques, various tools, software processes that are integrated to provide such type of service, because it all boils back down to access to resources within the organization, and in terms of trusting no one, as it says, to access resources unless they're authorized to access these resources. So
Yeah.
I think one of the main challenges as it relates to zero trust is that for many organizations, they hear about zero trust and they right away want to throw this thing in for compliance reasons, check the box situations into the organization, not recognizing that this is something that has to be done within scope. It has to be done within a particular framework in terms of you have to be strategic in terms of how it is that zero trust is implemented in an organization, bearing in mind the nature of the organization, its objectives, whether it's business objectives, if it's a business or organization, and how it is that this element that you're introducing is actually helping the organization to carry out its function safely rather than hindering the processes of that organization. So I believe that that is one of the big challenges for many organizations. I mean, probably you could share more on that point itself.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it has to be done within the proper context, right? You got to cover the fundamentals, right? Things such as, identity, data protection, governance, privacy. You talk about the HIPAA, you talk about the four, or what they call the different P's. You have PII, you have PHI, you have PCI, and you have IP. You have all those P's that need to be protected based on the industry that you may work in, right? So critical, those are the fundamental pieces, right? You got to think about network security. You got to think about user roles. You have to think about authentication and authorization. Again, that falls under the IAM piece. Identity is a huge part of all the zero trust, right? Then as you continue to mature up, so that's just a fundamental. I think most organizations realize that based on the environment and the vertical that they're working in, those are things that you have to do, as those are fundamental, basic things that you have to do. As you continue to move up the stack, right, you have to think about least privilege, right? Their capabilities around privileged access management, right? Now, you have that part covered. You now have to look at the dynamic governance. What does that mean? You have to govern. There has to be a process, how things are done, right? Data security, data loss prevention. That's another huge piece, right? Access control, adaptive authentication, whether it's from an IoT perspective or IT perspective, device, mobile, whatever it is, right? Micro-segmentation, software-defined perimeter. Those are all things that once you've covered the basic, now you're stacking up and you're saying, yep, I'm going up the journey. Now, how do you bring it all together, right? You got to look at something like having like a SIM tool, user behavior, and UEBA, right? User behavior analytics, right? You have to look at things like full network identity, policy integrate. All those things are that helps you move up the maturity stack. But again, like you said, organizations have to be realistic when it comes to the context in which they do business, the compliance regulations that they are subjected to, and how they continue to ensure that knowledge workers have a good experience, right? So you don't want to cause too much friction in the environment.
Exactly, and those are very valid points in terms of consideration, in terms of actually implementing this technology. And for persons to recognize that zero trust is not a tool, it's not something that you can actually go and buy off the shelf. But it requires, as you had mentioned very importantly, a very strategic approach in terms of its alignment with the organization. And I mean, trying to align it with various. And I think one of the best way they say in terms of implementing zero trust is to align it with the having done a risk assessment, that is, look at the various attacks. I mean, the risks associated with the context of the organization, and then to align it in terms of creating that mitigation against these various types of attacks, in terms of setting that at least that baseline from which to work. And as you rightly said, work your way in building your maturity level to the point that is more acceptable for you in terms of the space in which you operate as an organization.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think, Rudyard Kipling, guy from the 19th century or the 20th century, had this thing about, you talk about the who, what, where, why, when, and how, right? That piece of zero trust is probably one of the most fundamental things. Where you're saying, for example, who's accessing your data? Why are they accessing your data? How are they interacting with your data? Where are they coming from? Where's the data, right? I think those are all fundamental questions that organizations have to ask themselves when they decide to go down the zero trust journey, right? And again, you have the principles where I think, if I can remember, trust is a vulnerability, right? So you trust nothing, right? Again,
Mhm.
apply the Rudyard Kipling method, adopt a context-based security model, right? And then you have to have sort of the dynamic micro perimeter, right? So you always consistently ubiquitous ubiquitous least privilege across the board. You're accessing or interacting with my data to either process, store, or transmit. How are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Are you doing it in the proper time? Are you in the right space? So you're doing it from San Francisco at 9:55, but 9:57 you're in Russia. Something is kind of weird there, right? We don't have technologies that can move us across the globe that quickly. So those are all things that we have to consider, and they're just fundamental when it comes to adopting and applying a zero trust architecture within your organization.
In light of that, I mean, all you have just mentioned, what do you think is are the greatest challenges that organizations face in terms of implementing zero trust within their organizations? I mean, on a large scale, that is, or on a more strategic perspective.
I think it varies based on the organization, and again, the regulatory and compliance requirements, and the maturity of the organization. But generally speaking, I think there are a couple of factors. I couldn't necessarily point to one. One, however, which I think is a big challenge, is the knowledge gap. So you have folks who, good intention, but unfortunately, myself included, we don't fully understand the entire zero trust network architecture or the zero trust architecture, right? The challenge there is, and I've talked to a lot of clients where they don't know how far along they are in the journey because they're so consumed or subsumed with the day-to-day things. So I think that's one, time and education. I think the other piece is budget. Now that COVID has kind of subsided, and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt is also subsiding with that. Organizations also have to focus on the bottom line, right? So your EBITDA is always based on the market that you're in is always going to be a concern, and if it's going to if it's a huge and significant spend, organizations may pull back, which would leave CISOs and security organizations with finding alternatives, right? Or finding better ways to do more with less. right, or work more efficiently. And I think there's also a lot of noise out there from vendors, right? You have, the Palos, the Zscalers, the Netscope, the Orcas, the Wiz. You have all type. Which one do I choose, right? How do I start my journey? And then with all of that noise, it's really difficult. Again, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of money, you have stuff to do, and then you now have to go and understand which vendor is best, or will help you uh, implement some of those zero trust capabilities that you're looking for. So I think those are probably the four things that I continue to see in the industry. And I'm pretty sure they're smarter people with more experience that could come up with a better list. But from my perspective, that's what I see.
I mean, you've actually hit the nail on the head in terms of some of those critical components. I said before, one of the biggest challenges has to do with security leaders and the way they actually translate or communicate the importance of having this component or this system or mechanism being implemented in light of return on investment, being able to relate this to say, if this is done, then these are the benefits of actually implementing. Because one of the things is that when investors, when management executives think about all the expensive gadgets, all the processes, all the systems, question is, what are we getting for our dollar? What is this doing to help us financially? Not recognizing that there are certain risks that are associated with the nature of our business, and if we are not protecting our systems against these risks, then these are a financial impact. And at times, security leaders a challenge of actually relating risk in relation to, in financial terms, to the executives. So you are faced with that challenge of actually getting the support that is required. And it's something that I've seen, I've experienced. You do all the thesis statements, all of these things, but until you're able to simplify it for the powers that be to support this mission, then it will always remain just an idea, just a concept, as much as you said before, the noise that is pushing. And and more so in light of the globalization and the pressure, I said before, from meeting various compliance regulation. That's one of the major things that is actually pushing this along with other compliance regulations.
Not fair, Richard. We're right at the top of the hour, and you just brought up a topic I think we could have for our next meetup. And that's the ROI
Sure.
cybersecurity spend, right? That's a huge topic because that's kind of where I was kind of dancing around that topic. But you opened up a can of worms that I think would really benefit us if we kind of explore that for our next chat. So, preview, spoiler alert, I think the next one should be on cyber risk quantification, return on investment of security technologies. But that's a huge piece, and that's a boardroom conversation that a lot of companies are having. CEOs and CFOs are chiming in, and it's a very controversial topic, right? I'm not going to say any more because then we're going to go way over. But yeah, let's save this for another time.
Guys, so there you have it. Once more, thanks for joining us on our week review, and we definitely see you in the next recording. So, bye everyone. Chris, it was a pleasure again.
Absolutely. Great talking to you, as always.
Yeah, likewise. Bye, guys.